clock has officially started, so I am starting. This session is about translating what is general policy at our institutions into a governable practice. Before I start, let me say that my name is Eric Friedman. At the time that I built this slide set and wrote this presentation, I was the Provost and Executive Vice President for Academic Affairs at Truman State University. As of July 7th, I'm now the Provost and Vice President for Academic Affairs at the Maryland Institute College of Art. So, very different circumstance, but and it's a positive move for any of you. I wasn't not ejected because I implemented Interfolio. But I'll give you a little bit of the sort of institutional background. So for those of you who do not know Truman State University, Truman State is in northeast Missouri, in Kirksville. It's about 3 hours north of St. Louis or Kansas City. It's a population of about 18,000. Truman State University is defined in the state constitution as the liberal arts and sciences university for the state of Missouri. So again, in a population of about 18,000 in the city, there are actually 2 universities, Truman and A.T. Still. Truman used to be defined as the Princeton of the Prairie or the Harvard of the Midwest, or since my alma mater is Cornell, I said the Cornell of the country. We draw primarily from that sort of regional area, Kansas City, St. Louis, students from Illinois, students from Iowa. Those are our primary draws. The student population is about 3,600 students, undergraduate and graduate. The faculty body is about 250 faculty. So it's a reasonably sized institution. Also some background, it is always operated in the black. It does depend on tuition and estate appropriation, but it is financially stable. I was brought in May of 2023 as a new provost. One of my primary charges during the first year was to move the institution through academic reorganization, something that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. We were not undertaking that under any financial exigency. However, we had been an institution of about 6,000 students, and as our size, as we got smaller, and we've sort of plateaued, we are stable now in our enrollment with our first-time freshmen, some growth in online and graduate students, although the graduate landscape is currently in flux, as you all know. So we were very stable, our finances are good, and it gave us some affordance as I was moving through reorganization, not to downsize our faculty and staff, but to downsize our administration. We had about 26 departments and 5 schools, so 5 deans and 26 department chairs. I reorganized from 5 schools to 3 schools, from 26 departments to 18 departments. And the reason that's important, well, it created a certain cultural context in which, as a new provost, I was responding to a self-study about reorganization and departmental configurations and recommendations from the faculty. And I chose to act a little differently based on what I saw as conceptual synergies and not simply FTE or productivity, guaranteeing to the faculty that departments could be of various sizes. Larger departments would have different orgs to help them navigate a larger interdisciplinary mix. So, but that was part of the context. The other part of the context here is that I moved very quickly through that reorganization, but there were also other things that I wanted to accomplish. So given our financial stability, it gave me some place to really think about some of the systems that were operating at Truman. And I raised this question yesterday, sort of the context that we were dealing with was significant because I had to think about what were the conditions that were governing with our Board of Governors, what was that cultural climate, a faculty senate that I had not worked with before, but had quickly moved into a phase where I was asking some questions about policy and practice, and then academic departments, I was creating a new culture of new academic departments. Again, given the fact that we were operating in the black, I was able to institute a number of new systems we were doing an Interfolio implementation at the same time that I was introducing Curriculog. So when I arrived at Truman, all of the RPT, all of the promotion and tenure files, essentially I handed a stack of paper about this high to review all the faculty cases, and then I would either read those cases, or there'd be just a one page for me to like sign and maybe write some ad hoc comments, and then all those papers would then go to the president's office, and she would read and maybe add on that form some ad hoc comments. So it was a bear in terms of that type of workflow. It didn't really work. Interestingly enough, I had come from Columbia College Chicago. You're going to hear about Columbia College Chicago. That was my first exposure to Interfolio. So I knew there was a better way of accomplishing that process, a more diplomatic, a more transparent way. The other piece is I brought to the table Curriculog, another process that we had implemented at Columbia College Chicago, where I was the dean for 7 years prior to joining Truman. Curriculog allowed greater transparency in terms of our workflow and our approval processes for any changes to our curriculum, whether it be new programs, changes to existing courses, et cetera, and the like. Beyond that, I also implemented a tool from Lightcast called Lightcast Analyst and Lightcast Alumni Pathways that mapped with Lightcast Skillaby. I'm not pitching all these products, but I became known as the provost who was very systems oriented, and I didn't know if that was a good thing or a bad thing. I just took it for what it was for helping to improve some of these workflows. So the reason I mention all this is because as we look at how we implement these systems, my presentation is really helping to think through a series of problems and solutions, and also understanding that this is not just a system, Interfolio, that we're implementing, but it's a system that has to align with a number of existing processes, what are existing policies for faculty review, what are the distinct governing bodies, and as a new administrator, as a new provost, understanding where these things were housed, what they said, and unearthing some of the contradictions between our governance documents became very enlightening. I also had to make sure that as I was implementing, that I was honoring existing workflows that were sketched out in some of these governance documents, and that is what I've essentially sort of outlined below. This was the workflow. So as I introduced Interfolio, or in particular RPT, I did not invent a new workflow, but there was enough open-endedness in the governance documents to say that this did not have to move through a paper trail, but it didn't specify the system, it just specified the procedural steps through which review took place. And that made this a little easier. But these were essentially the three bodies that I had to pull together, and there had never really been a distinct analysis between what everyone was talking to me about Chapter 6, and for those of you who are new to institution, you get handed all these terms. Chapter 6 was the chapter in the Board of Governors policy document that outlined faculty review. So I had to understand Chapter 6 of the Board of Governors policy. I had to read through all the Faculty Senate resolutions, because each change to review, promotion, and tenure was not inventoried anywhere. It was buried in the minutes in Faculty Senate resolutions on our internal drive. So trying to find all those things was another chore. And then the academic departments had their own promotion and tenure documents. Promotion and tenure documents at Truman are written by the departments and approved by the Faculty Senate, and the provost essentially has no say in those documents. The Board of Governors has to approve, but the Provost's Office, Academic Affairs, does not approve those documents as long as they align with some of the governing principles of the Board of Governors. That said, there are also no university-wide guidelines for promotion and tenure at Truman State. So it was a matter of then finding out, well, where are all of these department documents housed, who owns them all, and where are they located? Some departments had them on file, some of them were on the Faculty Senate website, and some were sort of buried away in other places. So my work really here is trying to draw from that implementation and talk through some of the idiosyncrasies that I had to address between the people, the groups that I was dealing with, faculty senate, board of governors, department chairs, and channel all of these things while respecting and honoring, as we've heard, more of a sort of humanistic approach. Like, who are the people? What are the thoughts? How are they assessing the work that I'm doing as a provost as I'm trying to introduce a new process? The other thing, too, I mentioned reorganization. So as part of that reorg process at Truman, in the change in the number of departments, I opened up a process where all my department chairs were on a one-year contract as chair. So I was able to do an internal call for all 18 departments, for all new leadership. And that meant all of the existing chairs had to apply for their jobs, had to do public presentations. So I was able to create essentially a newly configured or refreshed leadership team, and that made moving through this process with Interfolio implementation that much easier. So just in a nutshell, our roadmap for implementation, I arrived in May of 2023. I reached out to Interfolio during that summer. We did signed our contract, I think, in August of 2023, and my eye was always on a May deadline for initial testing with my deans and then my chairs. So by the following August, we could do an first implementation for review, promotion, and tenure for those faculty who are moving through the process. So essentially a one-year development cycle, which was pretty seamless cycle. Some of the other players that I'm sure you're aware of, as a new provost, some of the primary concerns, we have to understand that Interfolio is a platform like any other platform. So the other parties that I had to think about beyond my faculty and my board and my chairs, we have a comptroller at Truman who is very sensitive, very audit sensitive. And I was told coming into Truman that we were going to have to do an RFP, go to bid for any new faculty information system. They had worked with another system. I don't know if I'll mention it, but the initials are DM. And that system had only been used by the business school. So it was essentially a big failure because no one in the business school, if they were the only units using it and they were using it for AACSB accreditation and counting, scholarly, counting research outputs, but no one else at the institution adopted that platform. So it was a failure for us. Nonetheless, the comptroller initially requested that we go to bid and was recommending, he clearly did a Google search, was recommending that platform, was recommending PeopleSoft, was recommending things that were, again, clearly a Google search had revealed. Fortunately, I was told that Truman had never done a sole source provider, but I reached out to other institutions in the state of Missouri system, found another one that had successfully done a sole source by piggybacking off of a sole source provision in the state of Florida. So we copied this other Missouri institution's utilization of a Florida state sole source agreement, and we're actually able to move both Interfolio as well as Curriculog, because we were already an Accolog subscriber, through a sole source approval arrangement, which Truman had not done. So in 1 year, I was able to pull off 2 sole sources. And that was sort of a hat trick for us to get things moving very quickly. That could have slowed down the process. The other piece that can slow down your process is, of course, your CIO or your Director of Information Technology. I'm sure you all have these at your campuses, and their primary concern around any new platform is data security, but also where's this data, what is the data policy, how public is that data policy, but also systems integration. Since our implementation works off of the architecture of Banner, the Banner integration was something that academic affairs could not do, but depended heavily on ITS, or Information Technology Service, to help us with that integration. The other piece of this to note is what is the size of your team? So at Truman, as provost, I have many other things to do, but I was the only one at Truman with Interfolio experience. So I essentially became the one person who was doing all of the back-end design work in partnership with my representative, Corey Froon, at Interfolio. So I upskilled my director of academic affairs operations, who was essentially, he was managing personnel, contracts, budget, facilities. He also was running our planetarium. He was also our director of esports, and I was trying to redefine his role to do more with personnel. So Jared and I worked strictly on the Interfolio implementation. I did it from an academic affairs perspective, knowing a lot more about faculty review, promotion, and tenure, and the language of those documents and how they operate. Jared worked with me from more of a implementation perspective, how to create cases. Along the way, so one of the strategies around our adoption beyond this initial workflow was to think about the case for adoption. And part of that case for adoption really rested on making the argument with all of the other partners that our existing work process, our existing workflow was not sustainable. So this meant getting closely involved with the chair of Faculty Senate, meeting with the chair of Faculty Senate and getting her buy and getting her consensus to move to a new system. And she was very grateful to do that. So as you think about implementation, you cannot ignore the case for adoption and the different parties that has to interact with. Again, from Senate, not necessarily the Board of Governors, but in my case, Faculty Senate, the comptroller, the director of IT, my deans, my chairs. That was the primary team of stakeholders that came together. Our banner expert as well, she was at the table. So we had a primary stakeholder group to really map out the case for adoption to move forward across the university-wide community. The necessary documentation I've already talked about. That was really working with ITS on data security policies, how the data was handled, how what did that look like. The deployment strategy meant thinking concretely about what was our timeline from design, testing to implementation, and that allowed us to really test out. After Jared and I really hunkered down in terms of the design build, it was really the two of us plus our Interfolio representative, Corey, working on all of the back-end architecture, on working on the design, because that could not be by design by committee. And I'll talk to you a little bit more about why that was necessary. Our deployment strategy for adoption 2 said, well, if one of these faculty information systems failed, what were we going to do differently? The reason that DM failed was because people saw it primarily in the business school as a CV tool. I have a professional CV. Why on earth would I do the extra work of recreating my CV in a faculty information system? And that's all they saw it as. So when we talked about the rest of the other 2 schools, they did not see any use for that. They would rather have a professional CV than look at the faculty information system as duplicative effort. The other piece of that deployment strategy was acknowledging who has access and what level access. So the history at Truman was that administrative assistants, secretaries, department admins were essentially tasked with doing all of the input. So a faculty member in the School of Business would hand their CV to their admin, and that admin would input that CV into the faculty information system. So there's also a cultural shift happening here. We're using an information system, an FIS, for a different reason, for a reason that exceeds CV development, and we're limiting access because your admin has no role in Interfolio. Because the question that I got repeatedly is, when does my admin get access? And the question that the response was, why does your admin need access? Your administrative assistant has other things. Your administrative system has been burdened by the faculty, depending on them. This is a faculty information system. Faculty can control their information, and faculty can input their information. So we made a conscious decision to communicate outward that admins would have no role within these systems. And that trickled up all the way into academic affairs, where my admin had been used to handing me all these documents. So I had to break the cycle of that culture too. And at some point she said during this rollout, of both Interfolio and Curriculog, like, do you still need me? So it meant redefining her role in ways that I think were more critical to the functioning of academic affairs, in the same way that admins and departments have other things that they could be doing rather than just inputting faculty information. The other piece was utilization. So thinking about how I'm going to get a strategy for adoption, we decided two things. We were going to mandate utilization of Interfolio by saying, well, if you want to be promoted or tenured, you're going to have to adopt the system. So if you want to go through an annual review, because we have tenured and we have tenure track and non-tenure track faculty, non-tenure track faculty go through an annual review process. If you want to be reviewed, you're going to have to use the system. So it became anyone who is up for review must use Interfolio. August is the time. We did dean deployment or dean training, chair training, and then faculty training at the early part of August when they were back on contract to allow them time to actually start to input. So it became a mandatory sort of process if you want to be reviewed, if you want to be eligible for promotion and tenure, if you want to be renewed, if you want your contract renewed, you're going to have to use the system. The other piece that we did is after we did our August training, we did an early initiated input. So what we acknowledged is that everyone needed a call to action. So it was one thing to train, it was another thing to say, well, here's an action item, like get people familiar with the system. Because what we were discovering is we had designed Interfolio so faculty could attach things, their research, their teaching, their service documentation, but you take it for granted when you assume that faculty unilaterally know how to log in. We had single source, single login, so it was logged into the university system, but a lot of them did not know. We discovered during the initiated input that there were like 2 buttons they needed to push. All that we asked for the initiated input, and we were doing this partly to introduce them to Interfolio, but also because we were about to go through HLC accreditation. So the one thing that we acknowledged that we needed from every faculty member was an updated CV. So our initiated input timed with our preparation for our HLC site visit, and we sent a note to all faculty across the institution to simply upload an existing CV, not to use CV Builder, just to attach their CV as a PDF. Well, some of them attached it, but never hit submit. But Jared on the back end could look in and say, I see you've attached this, but you never hit the submit. I can do that for you. And that was initial sort of adjustment period, and then it was, you have to reattach it and resubmit it. We had about 5, 6 angry emails from faculty who didn't understand, or a couple, maybe 3 holdouts among 250 who never wanted to. And then what we did was we would find an old CV, and from an administrative back end, we would simply upload it for them. But that simply got people familiar with the interface, which was a really important step beyond final formal implementation where the stakes were a bit higher. That did not help us tremendously, but this was the compromise, because you can understand as you're preparing for an HLC site visit or an accrediting body site visit, what you really need to do is count publications. This is why we had to explain this is not a good measure, because if everyone is uploading a PDF of their CV, someone still needs to extract the publications, the presentations. So for that first year, we deployed a number of student workers, student assistants, taught them how to code these fields, and then manually did an extraction. That was the goal year 1, knowing that year 2 we'd start to adopt the CV Builder tool, the FAR system, and that problem would necessarily go away. But we're under a time crunch. So the last piece was this notion of reflective practice, like how are we using the system now, and how might we use it into the future? I talked about a little of this earlier. So these were the things that I had to synthesize, and these were the things that I actually had to find. So our Board of Governors Code of Policies clearly outlined, what many of you probably see in your own institutions, what the requirements were. So what I was trying to do within these policy documents was not necessarily tease out my analysis of individual faculty, but as we move through the design and implementation process, working with Corey, the more you front end this research before you start to build, the better off you will be. So as you can clearly see here, a portfolio of evidence documenting teaching, advising, scholarship, service, those elements drove us in a particular directions. And in this case, most of us think about teaching, research, and service. But in this case, I had to make a conscious decision based on the BOG policy that advising had to be outlined somewhere. The advising had to fit into the design framework somewhere because we were counting it as a separate activity, but as part of the teaching portfolio. So it led us down a series of questions with the design and build, like where's the advising category? How is it pulled out? What type of evidence are we looking for in terms of advising? But this is what you need to look for in terms of the unique questions that you have to ask on the front end before you start to build the system so you know what it is you're capturing. The other thing that you'll see here too is I discovered that beyond this set, as I pointed out, all of the promotion and tenure documents were scattered across our intranet, or they were housed in filing cabinets. And the faculty had just moved through a revision to promotion and tenure documents in every department. So part of my strategy too, which ultimately led to greater transparency, was reworking our intranet. So yes, we were designing and building an Interfolio, but at the same time, I was looking at our intranet and saying, what are all of the things that people need to look for? What can't I find, let alone what can't faculty find? So I pulled together a central policy portal to house all of these things. So within this policy portal, you'll see that I have all of the promotion and tenure governance documents, meaning Chapter 6 is now linked there. The faculty handbook is now linked there. The Faculty Senate resolution, SR 1322, is now linked there. And below that, all of the promotion and tenure documents for every department as they became live, I would link to our intranet. Now, why this was important to do on the front end, to find all these documents, to link them somewhere, have active hyperlinks, but so I knew that where they were, incoming faculty knew they were, but also, and you'll see at the bottom of this, it is the access to Interfolio is also outlined there. There's another piece that's also outlined there in terms of the Interfolio training videos. All of the resources were there. Why this became important, because as you start to build in Interfolio, as you'll see on the next slide, and start to tease out the requirements, what you want to be able to do in your build is hyperlink out. So you can see as we start to build out the system, and this is the faculty, just pull up there, the Faculty Senate resolution, just to give you some sense of the variation. Teacher scholar model, so what is that? And faculty would see that and not know, so that's another reason why I had to sort of pull this in to sort of add it to the list of documents that we had to reference in the build process. And the other piece here as well, this is a more complicated analysis of SR 1322, which complicated our build process, because if you read through these documents, in this case it says, candidates for promotion and tenure must submit a brief cover document. Well, what is that cover document? It says a chart or table clearly identifying how evidence aligns with the requirements listed for each areas of the professorate, and then minimum standards demonstrated in the portfolio, and then there's a reflective document for each area. So there's a lot of gray in here. What is the cover document and what is the reflective document? And is that reflective document a document for each area, meaning if there are 4 fields, teaching, advising, service, and research, do you need a reflective document for each area, or do you need one governing reflecting document and where does that sit within the build process? So the more you can figure this out on the front end in my interpretation as provost, where I have the right of interpreting, was that this could be one reflective document that would sit at the front end of the dossier, but that if faculty wanted to break this out, they could also repeat that document with each area or break down the individual pieces. And this was the other piece that we had to familiarize ourselves with prior to actual implementation, the Code of Policies, Chapter 6. At each recommendation point, the candidate for tenure and promotion shall receive a copy of their recommendation being made and has the right to submit a written response. Well, if you don't account for that, right, then you don't know to build feedback into your design and implementation process. Unfortunately, there's no specification in terms of a timeline. What is the right to response? Is it 24 hours? Is it a week? Is it 2 weeks? Is it a month? Nothing is outlined here. So again, the logic, my interpretation was, let's give people a week to turn it around. So we had to provide that, but we also had to acclimate everyone, the department committee, the chair, the dean, myself, the president, on the right to response. What that meant is not just providing a right to response, but it meant my office had to generate, as part of the review process, a templated email that would say, your dean, your chair has uploaded, has completed their review. I had to teach the deans and the chairs independently how to then share that review. And in the first year, no one shared. So what I did at the provost level, at the academic affairs step, is I assumed that no dean or no chair had shared. So I shared at that point to make sure that we hit a requirement in the Code of Policies. It says each step, but I felt at least we're covering ourselves by, at this last step before it goes to the president, I am sharing and providing an opportunity for response. So we had to start to train people to be thoughtful about asking for that response. The other piece of the Code of Policy is where that response was going. So this was also accommodating the notion that faculty who were responding to review at any step typically sent it somewhere to a department chair, but now I had to shift that thinking to say you can submit your response directly into Interfolio as opposed to sending it somewhere where it may not actually hit your dossier. The other pieces that we were looking at in terms of policy or practice, I had to then synthesize all of the instructions to the candidate. So all the text that you see on the screen is all text that I authored because someone needed to sit down and provide instructions to candidates. And those instructions to candidates became uniform instructions to every candidate across every discipline. And as I pointed out earlier, there are some things that I outlined here, meaning I said the formative review of promotion and tenure is outlined in the faculty handbook and complies with Chapter 6. SR 1322 is mentioned. So you can now understand by pulling the BOG policy, the faculty senate resolution, and the handbook all together in one portal, as I started to write this text, I knew exactly where I was going to hyperlink to, so everyone could then find within Interfolio, as they were writing out their case, they could find all these documents very readily just by clicking through. So you had to identify, set up the location of those documents, and then as you enter this process for writing your text, you know concretely where you're directing people. And then the other things, again, pieced through based on my reading of some of the resolution documents, including the CV, including the brief cover document, including the reflective statement, and so forth. So those then drove how I then conceived of the instructions to each candidate and wrote the text accordingly. The other piece then that came into place was understanding that people didn't know, because they had had no history of this before, that Interfolio allows you to upload evidence. So I had to make clear that there is evidence of research. Truman, they didn't know what that. They weren't used to uploading publications. They weren't used to uploading evidence of creative work. So I had to then train them on what evidence meant. What is evidence of a conference presentation? Is it the invitation letter? Is it a copy of the conference catalog? What is this? And I also had to train them on evidence of service. So they were simply not used to the notion that each category of things had evidence that you could attach. And in our first round of review, what we started to identify in my feedback comments was Interfolio provides you an opportunity to provide evidence in each area. You have provided insufficient evidence. Please go back in and upload the evidence. And these are some forms of evidence that you might consider. It was really training the faculty. And again, I had come from other institutions where I thought this was common knowledge and common practice, and people over-documented their evidence of successful teaching. They'd have thank you notes from students, and I'm like, that is not what I want. But they started to adjust their mindset and get into this notion of what type of evidence should be required. I think getting close to the end here, one of the other things was formalizing the review process. So all of the steps in the process, from peer review all the way up through the Board of Governors, I had to make a determination, is this policy or is this practice? And that's the title of my presentation, because what I didn't know, I knew what the workflow was, I knew what the review steps were. Those were outlined as policy, but nowhere did it say what that review consisted of. And you'll remember when I started this, I said I got a stack of documents with a one-page cover sheet that had about this much room for me to write a comment and then check a box. And the president then also had that form, which you could write a 2-sentence comment and check a box. That was not my mindset in terms of promotion and tenure, or even annual review of non-tenure track faculty. I was used to sitting down, writing a memo, talking. It's more work, but I saw it as my responsibility to talk through non-tenure track faculty to provide them some sense of how well they're progressing, or faculty on the tenure track to provide some real concrete analysis of, are you meeting expectations in each category? If not, why not? Where do we need to remediate? How do we move you successfully into the future? And that's more than 2 sentences. That's a formal memo in my head that I generate for each faculty member that I then attach. I did not know what common practice was, so then I had to make a determination. In this case, the executive vice president, is it a required document that I'm adding in here, or is it a required form that I'm adding here? I made the initial assumption that the president too would want to make a document. So this, again, you have to think about this on the front end, because what I initially did here is I knew I was writing a memo. I did not know whether or not the president wanted to write a memo, and certainly I did not think the Board of Governors wanted to write a memo. So there are 2 things. What am I asking for in terms of the approval chain? Is it a form? Is it a document? Make that decision. I made the assumption going in with first year that the president would want to write a memo. Again, you're writing a template, you're creating a template for all. So I then pivoted halfway through this process, and I decided the president doesn't want to write memos for all these things. She was used to reviewing all cases, and I'd made a determination in consultation with her. It wasn't necessary for her to write a formal memo for every non-tenure track annual review. The only formal memo that she should write was around promotion and tenure cases, and not even midpoint or post-tenure reviews, just promotion and tenure cases that were going to the Board of Governors. So on all those other cases, I went back in and I edited every case, and I changed her requirement from a document to a form that simply said approve or meets expectations or does not meet expectations. You want to know that going in, what is the preference of the person somewhere else in the approval chain? What is their policy or practice? Like, this is the policy the president needs to review. What is the practice? What does the president want to do as part of that review? At the end, she was thankful for not having to write memos for all these candidates, but would always check in with me, like, am I supposed to be doing something in Interfolio right now? And I would say, no, I got this. The other piece here, knowing your Board of Governors. I knew that my Board of Governors was not, who on the Board of Governors is going to go in and close the case. I made a determination that I was going to be the administrator who was representing the Board of Governors. So my policy was Board of Governors approves, and the Board of Governors does approve at their meeting, when they go through all these cases in closed session. Their administrator then texts me, promotion and tenure cases have been approved. I go into Interfolio as the administrator. I approve in the as the Board of Governors rep, and then I immediately send out my memo or my letter congratulating those people who have been awarded promotion and tenure. So it provided a decision, an inflection point for me to say, Board of Governors, just a form. I am the administrator. I'm going to check it, and I'm going to then close the case on behalf of the Board of Governors. And that's where you can see what I sort of landed on in terms of the president's approval was really just approve or deny tenure and promotion. I pivoted here to just make it a checkbox where she could, but didn't have to insert additional comments. And what I wind up doing with regard to promotion and tenure is I typically did this for her, knowing unless there was a problematic case. The last thing, I think this is my last slide, is breaking the cycle. So my admin asked, do I still need to provide a calendar for when all these things happen? And I said, in the interim, yes, we need to know these dates. These dates then feed my Director of Academic Affairs Operations, Jared, so he knows when to initiate the case. Our goal, which is what we're doing now, is moving through into lifecycle management. So now, what we used to have, this is a literal Excel file that then is reviewed by the deans, goes to my Director of Academic Affairs Operations. So he knows how to create the cases, when to initiate them and send them out. My goal is now that we've moved into lifecycle management, which we've just completed, that this document will go away, and now Jared can input in lifecycle management the triggers to make the cases when they are necessary. So that allowed us to finally sort of synthesize all of these elements. I think we had a successful implementation. I think I closed all the cases successfully before I left Truman, and they are, I think, in good stead with now all pieces of it, FAR, lifecycle management, RPT, faculty search. We didn't yet initiate, but we did all our training. Godspeed with them on doing faculty search this fall. But that's also a different, stakeholders became different. HR came into the conversation and was part of the stakeholder group around faculty search because we had been using people admin. And the central question is, are we using people admin still? And I said, yes, for staff, but not for faculty. So that's the next sort of piece of the puzzle for Truman to complete. Thank you.